Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and the time is 9:03. Today is Wednesday, November 15th, 2017, and this is day one of the Physical Therapy Board of California board meeting. We are meeting at Ohlone College, Health Science and Environmental Science Division, located at 39399 Cherry Street, room NC 1100 in Newark, California. Could we please have roll call?
Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Rubina Amen.
Here.
Deborah Alviso.
Here.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Present.
Tanya McMillan. Tanya McMillan is absent. And TJ Watkins.
Yeah.
All right. We have 5 members present, and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, and so we're going to take the agenda item number 6 first this morning and move into closed session so that we can have some audience a little later in the morning. So we'll go into closed session and resume around 10 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay.
The water.
Okay, we're back on record, and we'll pick up with our agenda items. And I'd like to first acknowledge that we've got some members of the public and welcome you. Feel free to participate in any way that you'd like. We'll start with a review of the minutes, agenda item number 3.
Would you like to go through them page by page, or just call any changes? How would you like to approach
We'll
this?
go page by page.
Okay. So, page 1. Or, I'm sorry, I'll go by book page.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, book page 8 is where we're going to start to review the minutes. And just stop me if you have any comments.
I had a question, or with the roll call and establishment of quorum. Dr. Dominguez was not present on day 1.
Okay.
I think that was reflected in the minutes
Later, right,
for the day 2.
all were present except for Dr. Dominguez. And then day 2, it does show that you are right. In reading through the minutes, that to me it was a little confusing when I first saw it. When I saw the first note that he wasn't there, but then as we move forward, then things didn't make sense to me. And so going down to I'll wait till we get to the page.
Would a parent's clarification in that line indicating that he was there for the second date just create that clarity?
Or if it was roll call for day 1.
Yes.
If it just simply said that, roll call day 1.
Yeah,
because then there's a roll call for day 2,
That's right.
which would then reflect that.
Okay.
And on the subject of roll call, I'm just wondering, on day 2, I excused myself early. Do the minutes need to reflect that, or?
They should.
Okay, so that we'll wait till you get to that page. Okay, Sarah, sorry.
No problem. Anything else on page 8? All right, page 9.
So here's where that roll call piece comes into play, and it's with B, the proposed meeting calendar, and the vote. The vote happened on the second day when Dr. Dominguez was present, because we had requested that. And then because Dr. Rubina then just reminded me that she left early, I'm wondering, were you present? Was she present for that vote? And if she
Yes.
was, then the vote should be 7-0, I believe.
Yes, I was present.
And that then triggered another thought in my head about, with recording of the vote, because we are now doing roll call votes, is the roll call vote recorded anywhere? Is that maintained so that, because we're going through the steps of doing the roll call, for a specific purpose, for a specific reason.
Correct.
We're not documenting what the votes of each person are. If we're just documenting the number 6-0, then we're losing
That's a good point.
the point of the roll call.
And so I'll probably rely on council a little bit on this question because it's a further change, if you will, to a previous change where we move to roll call voting. Are we required at that point to keep an archive of what the actual roll call vote was, and should we incorporate that into the minutes?
I'm not currently aware that it is required that if we're in the minutes, you are, I believe, required, the board is required to do the roll call vote. How that translates into the minutes, I couldn't say right now, but that is something I could look into.
And just as a matter of mechanic, it is archived in the webcast itself, but is there an obligation for us to have vote tally sheets or something that are, queryable later on down the line, or should we think about that in the minute document itself since it's our essential archive?
There certainly isn't anything that I'm aware of that would indicate that the board shouldn't do that, and it sounds like to me a good idea, and Board Member Jummer has expressed an interest in it, so it might be a good way to go. But as to whether it's a requirement that it appear in some kind of documentary recording like the minutes, I would have to look into that.
Okay.
And can you remind us as to why we have to do the roll call? I don't remember the specific rationale as to why we transitioned to that.
Guidance provided to us by legal counsel. Not necessarily as a result of any action or instance that may have occurred with this board,
Okay.
but the change was department-wide.
Okay. And so, yeah, with that, I would suggest that we move forward with documenting what each person's vote, each board member's vote was with the recording.
And that may only be necessary when there's a split vote. The all members, maybe we do need to list who was present at that. And I hadn't even noticed that things taken out of order would make a vote appearance look different. I hadn't even seen that, so good catch.
And thinking of day 1 and day 2 being captured within that section, which kind of seems like it takes it out of chronological order. On line 47 is the continuance of day 2. If we labeled that as the board discussed meeting dates on day 2 of the meeting, or something along those lines to indicate where we said we were going to leave it in the first paragraph, but we picked it up on the second paragraph. I think there's just a continuity of language that needs to be.
And I appreciate that as a point, but as Dr. Rabina said, she left early. So even if we said that it was on day 2, we still wouldn't know if she was present for
Right.
that vote or not.
So I think under the motion and the vote section itself, we would still show who was in attendance for the vote.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perhaps, and just to provide clarification, would it be possible to move the parts that happened on day 2? It looks like that discussion paragraph as well as the vote itself happened on day 2. Could that be moved?
I think it could, but I
To
think
day
it's
2?
kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. We're fighting with chronology of a predetermined agenda that's regimented to a certain extent but flexible at the same time. So if I do that and somebody's looking for that material and they look at the agenda topic and they get there and they realize it comes back, and are they going to miss out on the second part, I guess, is my issue.
I was just looking up some of the Bagley-Keene guidance materials that have been distributed at one point or another, but what I have is beginning January 1, 2015, for each item on which a vote is taken, the minutes must contain a record of how each member voted on that action item. For example, aye, members A, B, and C. No, members D and E. Abstain, member F.
Nice. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you for looking that up.
Any further discussion on roll call vote or that particular item?
Given that note, then it seems the way to go is to amend the minutes to reflect the roll call vote.
Anything else on page 9? Page 10? $11? $12? And 13 goes into the next day. I'm on page 13.
So on the vote on item 16, that was a question where I had, was the vote is documented as 6-0, but was it 7-0 because everybody was present? Or should there be a total of 7, not necessarily that?
There should be. But we'll also use the new format.
Anything else on page 13? All right, page 14? $15? $16? $17?
The only comment I have is, since I did leave early, I was wondering if there was any discussion on, further discussion on the presentations made by the FSBPT regarding interest in either presentation of the compact or the PET, use of the PET, or was there no further discussion once I left?
No, other than thanking the speakers for their contribution, there wasn't any discussion with members about benefit
Okay,
or con or anything like that.
no further comment.
So a question, are we in a place to approve these minutes, or are you going to be correcting the votes? And should we hold them?
I believe that's up to you. I think it's something that you can say, that staff can be empowered to go back and look at the votes, create the new format, and include it in this version of the minutes. We've discussed what the amendments would look like, so very similar to any other language. You could pass it as amended, but I'll defer to council.
Would that be acceptable?
Yes, I think you can, whoever makes the motion can lay out what the changes will need to be, and then say, delegate authority to the EO and his support team to make those changes and adopt as amended.
I'd like to make such a motion that the voting, the attendees, and the roll call corrections that have been discussed would be made. I didn't note any other content changes, so I'd like to motion that the minutes be approved with those amendments.
There were a couple others, if you did want to consider
Sorry, which
including in your motion. So the changes that I noted were on item 2, day 1, adding roll call day 1, that language of day 1.
Yes.
And then I believe there was an additional change. Oh, on the page 9, to add language to the paragraph that appears before the motion to introduce that as day 2.
Yes.
And then to change that vote to 7-0. And then on that page 9, and then to change another vote to 7-0. I'm locating the page 13, just to make sure we capture everything. Yes.
Agenda item 16.
On item 16, page 13, change that to 7-0. And if you would like, you could make a motion to adopt the minutes for August 23 and August 24 meeting with the amendments I just described, and give authority to the executive officer, Jason Kaiser, and his support team to make those changes, as well as any other technical, non-substantive changes that may be necessary. And you do not have to repeat all of that. You can just make the motion, and then we can get a
So
second.
moved.
But let's complicate things just a little bit further. So on the second day for call to order and establishment of quorum, where we'll be stating the attendance of that day, in those rare occasions where members might have to leave early or come in late, is it the board's wish to have it documented there and only there? So in the instance where Alicia had left later in the afternoon, we would just indicate on the final line of that paragraph that she left at what time.
I'm fine with that.
Is that okay? Okay.
Because now the votes that would occur, you would be able to track those anyway.
Right.
Yes, so what I just described, plus the addition of a sentence to item 14 on day 2, August 24th, indicating that board member Alicia Urbina left early.
You may want to add to the votes that, in this particular case, that Alicia was absent, just put in that line, Alicia Urbina Amon absent.
For those votes that you...
Right, because
Sure.
sometimes we take things out of order
Yes.
and, you know, we're not really sure at what particular time the vote happened.
I think that's a good idea.
Indicating the yays, nays, and absentees.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Dr. Alviso, second by Dr. Drummer. Any further board discussion? Any public comment? Okay, roll call vote.
That was a long one. Give me a snack. Okay, ready. Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Urbina Amon.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Aye.
Tanya McMillan. Tanya McMillan is absent. And TJ Watkins.
Yes.
So before we move to the next agenda item, I will tell you that the review of this minute package was different than the last, subsequent to our conversations about minute review. And so it has been through a much more thorough review and different levels too. So both legal counsel have had their take and spin on it as well. It's accounted for here. And I think it turned out pretty good that way. So, but I also like the new structure for recording the votes. I think it'll be very thorough.
Okay, so let's move on to acting president's report and look at our calendars. We are at the end or nearing the end of 2017. So let's look at 2018 and open it up to any comments, concerns, or questions. Looks like we are moving our regular meetings from 1 month after what we usually do in order to better capture some reports from staff.
Yeah, for a number of different reasons. One, data accessibility and being able to report it in a timely manner. Some of the documents coming out of the department or fiscal aren't readily available in time for the schedule we're currently on. But it also had to do with resources such as webcasting and even room availability in state buildings. The legislative calendar, academic calendars, to make sure that when we do have or can bring a board meeting to a campus that we actually have an audience. So just taking all those things into consideration, the shift 1 month back concept was born, so.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Any questions or comments about any of the dates that are currently proposed for 2018?
I have a comment, not about a date, but just the title. We can, since it's the only plan, it's the only proposal at this point, to scrap the Plan B.
Yes.
And did we vote to adopt this?
We did.
At the August meeting? Okay, so it's no longer a proposed, it is the,
No, the opportunity now is in case anything has come up or you have conflicts that should be considered.
right. But it has been adopted?
It has.
Okay.
So the only comment that I have is that that puts our next board meeting 5 months away, 4 months away. If I'm doing my math right. 4 months away. And does that create any potential problems or challenges?
It could. There is a potential that an enforcement action might require board's attention, and that time we could do a teleconference or call together an emergency meeting in the interim. I don't see anything on the horizon that would require that, but it's always possible.
Okay.
While we were talking about calendar, was there the possibility of adding a day for strategic planning?
There are some materials in your package, though, that kind of reference a laid out calendar that DCA's solid training unit has mapped out for us. I know that the board desired to their desire was to have DCA present solid here. They don't have the resources to travel, so they couldn't be here today to make that presentation. So I am, in my report, going to try and play solid for at least a few minutes to explain to you how the process works, but we'll get to that when we get to the executive officer's report.
And at this point, it wouldn't cause us to look at an additional day.
According to their plan, it wouldn't. It would be an additional day in March to coincide with it, but that's up for discussion.
Could I chime in on that one? We are going to be wrapping up CAPTE accreditation on Wednesday the 21st. So that might be an issue for me if you added a day.
Okay.
So thank you. If we added a day, which I think would be Wednesday, that's the last day of our CAPTE visit.
Okay.
And just wanted to make a note that that'll be our first board meeting where we actually hold it on a Thursday, Friday. Okay, in Sacramento. All right, any other comments? Any public comment on the calendar?
You're welcome to come here in December if you like.
So we've got an invitation.
We have an invitation.
Yes, for December.
So it's mixing agenda topics a little bit, but since we're on the calendar and with that input, and I'm sure that solid is flexible, in either regard. It's really a matter of board members' calendars and availability and that kind of thing. But an idea that kind of sticks out to me is if we were going to make the March meeting a 3-day meeting with 1 day being designated to strategic planning, we could do the 21st and 22nd as board meeting and the 23rd as strategic planning.
With the understanding that I probably would have to miss.
Miss the first day. The other option is, and this is also according to Solid, is the planning session itself does not have to be or center around a board meeting. It's just for us sometimes fiscally it's more prudent travel-wise. But coming to Sacramento, they would be open to 2 weeks before, the week before, the week after, or something like that. So it's not necessarily something that you have to decide about right now, but the sooner the better.
if at all possible, I'd love for all board members to be able to attend all days, especially since we've got time to plan it, is doing any type of board business on Saturday unattractive to us?
There are other boards in the Department of Consumer Affairs that meet exclusively on weekends. I've never tried or attempted to bring that to you guys as an alternative. So you said it.
So something to consider as we hear more about Solid in this meeting. We can revisit it.
Solid might have an issue, if I wanted to do the planning session on Saturday, Solid might have an issue with that, but I can certainly ask and find out.
Okay. And if we had a board meeting on a Saturday, would there be any conflict with DCA
I don't believe so, no.
webcast?
And that particular meeting, we're scheduled to be at home in our own building, in our own conference room, so it might, conveniently, it might work out.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on the calendar at this point? Any public comment? I was just wondering, in December, are you having your finals during that time? The following week? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. All right. So let's move on to the Executive Officer's Report, item number 5.
So the report that I prepared for you, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I have a couple of things that have occurred since the writing of this report that I'd like just to highlight. And one of them is that we have a new member of the PTBC family. So as you can see, Brooke Arneson isn't with us today. She's out on maternity. But she brought into the world her baby little boy named Colton Dale on November 1st. So we're happy about that. And if she's watching the webcast from home, she'll be scolded when she gets back. In this executive office report is also 2 attachments regarding the Solid Training Solutions strategic planning sessions. The very last page of that is the calendar that we've mapped out with Solid, and it gives you a timeline. I will tell you that the process seems to be much improved. We've utilized Solid as a facilitator for our strategic plan in the past, and it left a lot of the work to be done by board and board staff, and it lacked a little bit. So I've looked at a couple different examples of work product coming out of that unit for, the Department of Consumer Affairs has done their strategic plan through the Solid Training Unit, and the end product is very attractive, very thorough, very complete, more organized, and the process is very metered. So the resources will be there to help us along the way. And so I think utilizing Solid this time around would be a good experiment in determining whether or not we would use them moving forward. Any questions about the attachments?
Is this where we would, I'm sorry, is this where we'd have any discussion about Solid and going their way? Is this where we'd have discussion for that? Does anybody have any comments or questions about using Solid for strategic planning?
So I'm looking at the calendar after the session. When would the plan then have to go through an adoption by us? And would that be, first look at that would be May or June?
We would adopt it at the next subsequent meeting. So we'd be presented with a final product by Solid, which we would have had a lot of stakeholder input into by that point anyway. But we would adopt the plan at the next meeting.
Also, if we decide to continue with this, we would have to get in the process by January according to this timeline. And so we won't be able to, look at whatever they are proposing unless this is the proposal. That they will interview us, we'll go through our own process and they're going to determine what they determine and then compile a report.
This essentially is the proposal, and it's very much what you would see if they came and did a presentation of what the product looked like. We do have alternatives. There are other vendors outside of state service that we can contract with to facilitate our strategic planning sessions. We've done it in the past. The first session that I was ever involved with was a company called CPES out of Sacramento. And then the second was, I think, the Solid Training Solutions in its infancy. I mean, they had just recently been put together as a unit. So they have acquired some talented staff with strategic planning management experience. And everything looks like it folds out to a good product. The other thing that I would state is it's a pro rata service. So in some ways we pay for it regardless of whether we use it or not. And it's not a deciding factor, but it should be a contributor in the decision as to whether or not we span away from Solid and hire through contract and pay a company like CPES or an independent third party, which would be an additional expense, or do we take advantage of the pro rata services that we already pay for and utilize Solid's in-house strategic planning services? The map starting in January, I think, while the descriptors are somewhat vague, gives you an idea how frequently they'll be staying in touch with and involved with both board members, stakeholders, board staff, that kind of thing. So, and I prefaced it in my presentation that I would try my best to be a Solid representative today, but this is getting to the extent of my knowledge at this point.
Jason, have you had contact with other boards who have used Solid for their strategic planning? Have you had opportunity to review their strategic plans,
Yes.
the end product?
Yes. So the Board of Behavioral Sciences, and in discussions with their executive officer, because I wasn't completely sold. I hadn't made up my mind whether I would recommend to the board going with a third party or with utilizing Solid's services. But after seeing those end results, I'm more confident in that decision.
So according to this calendar, a strategic plan wouldn't be adopted until after the end of March, and our meeting is a week before that.
So you would essentially finalize all board involvement with the strategic plan itself at the March meeting or thereabouts, somewhere around that time.
Okay.
They would step away, create it in its finality, make a more polished, publishable product, and then we would adopt that at the June meeting.
I gotcha. Any further questions or comments on using Solid? It's just a decision that doesn't need a vote. It's just agreeable.
It's a matter of
It's agreeable.
process.
Okay. Any public comment? Okay. Any other comments on the executive officer's report?
Yes.
I have a couple as well. I'll let you go first, Jason.
Okay. The other highlight point that I would just comment on is the Veterinary Medical Board has also adopted some language to promulgate through regulation. And I've provided you with the final language in summary right in the report. And then just so you could see its evolution, what the language looked like when it was presented. And I only say that because I want you guys to keep in mind that the language at this point is in its infancy. It still has to go through a very thorough review with the department, with legal counsel, public comment, and that kind of thing in OAL. And it will change over time. I can tell you that just based on public comment, that there are going to be, there's going to be quite a few stakeholders that have an interest in seeing things reworded or restructured in the language as it exists today. So here it is, just keeping in mind that I think that there's a good likelihood it will change.
That was one of my comments, was to hear a little bit about that.
Sure.
And any other comments about animal rehab? Yes?
I just have one note that at the last Veterinary Medical Board meeting, in Section E of the new proposed regulation on animal physical rehabilitation, actually I think it's subdivision D, they're going to be clarifying that a VA can perform APR on an animal patient in a range setting, which was important because that's the treatment of herd animals, and direct supervision is a bit more difficult in those cases. So the supervising veterinarian would be in the general vicinity of the treatment area for those range settings. So just the one clarification, and the board adopted that language.
I think for those in the room that might not know, the Veterinary Medical Board is considering creating a carve-out, if you will, in their Practice Act to allow physical therapists to provide physical therapy services for animals, which is a very difficult thing to do from a regulatory perspective and in Practice Acts because it's a bit of an overlap issue. And so they've been working on it for quite some time, and we're discussing what's going to be proposed as the final regulatory language. So, thank you, Tara.
Any further comment on animal rehab? Any further comment?
So the suspicion, the anticipation is that the words veterinary assistant is not going to be acceptable to the PTs who want to practice animal rehab. That's going to be too broad of a term, because it looks like veterinary assistants are essentially aides in our language, and there's no regulation for what an aide on an aide, and so it's just what the vet decides is going to be okay.
And so very similar to our regulation concerning aides, because the parent license is responsible for all care administered by that assistive personnel, that licensee is responsible for knowing and documenting the knowledge, skills, and abilities of their, in this case, a veterinary assistant. Looking into a crystal ball, do I think that there's going to be any stakeholder input as to whether or not that language is too loose? I think there's a very good chance that you might hear stakeholder feedback about that, and that there may be some people in the discussion who don't think veterinary assistants should be allowed to do animal rehab without proper training. That proper training might be the existence of a master's or doctorate in physical therapy. I'm just speculating.
Any further
I
discussion?
would say, however, though, in the regulatory scheme of things today, animal rehabilitation is the practice of veterinary medicine. And so today, without any regulatory change, a veterinary assistant can do animal rehabilitation under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. And it doesn't seem to be broken.
I didn't dive into the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act to see if a veterinary assistant has a definition.
It does.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Okay.
I also have a couple points to highlight in the outreach portion. We had a very successful go-around at the California Physical Therapy Association's annual event. Dr. Drummer joined us and helped man a booth. We set up a Breeze kiosk and managed to renew a couple licenses and do a couple name changes. Just bring awareness to Breeze in general. In fact, I think Dr. Drummer helped a 4-digit licensee renew her license, create an account on Breeze, and renew her license for the first time electronically. So we also had a presentation at Sac State in September and October, a series of 3 days. We'll be going to Western Education University in December, University of the Pacific in January, and Mount St. Mary's in early 2018, and still looking for more opportunities and invitations to provide outreach to future applicants. So.
I would love to take credit for helping the 4-digit licensee get through the process, but it wasn't me. I simply directed her to the laptop where Vincent was sitting and helped her through the process.
Yeah.
So thank you to him.
Thank you for being there, Dr. Drummer.
It was great fun.
Anything you want to say about that?
I'm just really glad that the PT board was able to get back to the CPTA's annual conference. The first time in how many years?
7.
Many. 7?
7 years, I believe.
Something like that, yeah. And there were lots of members, lots of students who stopped by the booth, passed out lots of the laws and regs coaster cards, and got them to pay attention to that. It was, I think it was very well received.
It's an excellent point. We created a few QR codes that lead to some pretty core documents for any applicants who are, or future applicants who are thinking about licensure, and there are some by the front door here. That wasn't the golden ticket, though. Everybody wanted the printed copy of the laws and regulations governing the practice of physical therapy. And unfortunately, that's expensive. So the QR codes we thought were a nice kind of compromise. I will say that the QR code will take you to an electronic document, though, that is much more reference user friendly. I mean, there's hyperlinks and clickable one section to another. If you're in a statute, you can actually click to where the regulations come from, or vice versa. Keyword searchable, those kind of things. And I know people like to have a book that they can tab up and highlight and do all those kind of things. You can do all those kind of things in a PDF too. So in an effort of going green, and because it's so expensive, we have a limited supply of printed copies. But at the CPTA conference, we did hand out a few. We did some kind of pop quiz situations where if people were able to answer questions, we might give them a copy or something like that. So we'll consider that in the future.
But I also reinforced that hard copy is only good as up to the day it was printed. And any law changes that happen after that aren't included in that book. And that the PDF, the digital document is a live document. It's going to be continually updated. So that's the place where people really need to go to get that up-to-date information.
And this is the perfect time to see how important that is. We have a few statutes that are going to become effective January 1st, and we have some regulations that are in the pipeline. So there is a good possibility that, getting your printed version on one day might be obsolete the next. So the electronic copy is the way to go.
Regarding outreach, I know that President Ellaby had appointed 2 members to an outreach committee. Is there anything on the horizon right now?
Yeah, so since the last meeting, we have been a little bit busy with CPTA and the FSBB Delegate Assembly and those kind of things, but Dr. Drummer and Mr. Watkins, we have not had a chance yet to meet about the outreach committee itself. So while I've had conversations with them individually, we haven't had a chance to meet, but it's something that we'll be looking at in the next month or 2.
Okay. I think the only other question that I have from your report, Jason, is regarding the audit
Yes.
and its completion and a report. And I saw that, I was reminded when I read the minutes that Dr. Alviso had asked if we would be able to, as board members, have a chance to look at the report.
And in my talks with DCA, board members can absolutely see that report, but you would request it just the way any member of the public would request it. So it's not something that is board actionable. It's ministerial in nature, so it's between the department. And you might have seen in my reports moving up through this process, because they were with us for a fairly lengthy part of time, that we're not bound or beholden to the findings of that report. It is just something that is assistive in nature and one of those services that we pay for in pro rata. We're using it though as a guide to implement some best practices, and some things that we can change internally with our processes work. But if you want to actually see it, I could probably have DCA send you a copy of it.
Okay. Any further discussion on the executive officer's report?
I wondered, because it wasn't included in the agenda, but the FSBPT meeting in New Mexico, are you prepared to share anything?
I think we have a few things to share, but it's under the actual FSBPT
Oh, it is there. Okay.
agenda.
Okay, any public comment? All right. So, Jason, would you like to move to item number 9, agenda item number 9? Is that a good time for this?
So the ledger report?
That is Sunset Review Report?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That one's pretty easy.
Okay.
So. My son walked away with my charger for my iPad. So my homework on my iPad is now unavailable, so I'm winging it a little bit from the laptop.
Marcus?
Yep. I get to say his name on a webcast. That's awesome. Sure, he'll appreciate that. Although he is in good graces, though, so. So AB 1706 has been chaptered by the Secretary of State and is effective. It extends the board's authority to January 1st, 2022, and we had a number of successes. Just pull this up a little bit. It repeals the existing renewal exemption language effective January 1st, 2019, which allows us then at that point to utilize the general provision for retirement in the BMP Code 464. And so we'll be providing the board with language in the upcoming months about renewal status. It also created exemptions for the TOEFL requirement for foreign educated graduates that may have been educated in certain English-speaking countries, but also provided an alternative means condition that the board can exercise for special exemptions. It also removes the requirement that fees do not exceed the costs of providing those particular services. So, as an example, the application fee, we do a fairly healthy and heavy assessment of what it takes to process an application, and that's how we determine the fee. And the legislature determined that that's fairly antiquated language, and so they removed that and struck it from every source in our Practice Act that indicated that. So they also removed the requirement to report to the fiscal and appropriate legislative committees of any fee increases. The only thing that we were not successful in was extending our statutory fee caps, which is something we may have to address later, farther down the line. We're pretty financially healthy right now, but because we're bouncing off the rev limiter, if you will, we have no room to move. In the event that there was something unforeseen, like a lawsuit, the board would not have a whole lot of latitude to adjust. But those kind of things in and of themselves might be reason to seek out emergency legislation to increase a fee. So the process, the sunset sunrise process itself, I think this year was a labor of love with staff and more board members alike. But I think everything that we put into it kind of came out on the other side. So all the effort, really had a reward. We were invited to speak by DCA, by the Department of Consumer Affairs, to speak to those boards that are going through the next legislative session through Sunrise and Sunset. The calendars didn't really line up because we were actually at the CPTA convention at the time. So we didn't get a chance to share our experiences, but a few of the other EOs and I kind of collaborated on some high points and highlights for them to keep in mind. So, but getting that kind of recognition from the department that they'd like us to share our experience with the rest of those that are about to go through the process is something that I appreciated. And I think that's the last thing I'll ever say about 1706. We're done.
Congratulations to everyone.
Any questions about the extension of the board and its authority? No? Good.
Okay, no further discussion by the board. Any public comment about our sunset process? Okay. Would you like to move on with the legislation report, Jason?
Yes.
Agenda item number 10.
So I'm going to try to fit, sub in for Brooke here, and I'll just tell you out front, she's much better at doing this than I am. But highlights, October 15th was the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills passed by the legislature, and had to be in his possession by September 15th. All statutes take effect January 1st of 2018. And we had a few bills that we were watching and a couple that we were interested in. So in your materials, you'll see a good portion of those bills either turned into 2-year bills, were withdrawn, but one bill in particular that this board was concerned with was AB 208, which was the deferred entry of judgment or pretrial diversion bill. And that bill, over time, kind of changed a little bit in the very last hours of the legislative session. It narrowed the range of who qualifies for pretrial diversion. It eliminated those that may have a drug or felony charge within the last 5 years. You could not have a violent offense in the last 5 years. And it also extended the treatment program portion of the bill from 6 to 12 months and the duration of the program in its entirety from 12 to 18 months. And there was also exception language included that those that are within Division 2 of the Business and Professions Code could still utilize those documents for both discipline and denial of license, which kind of takes away all of the concern that we might have had. So that bill is now in effect on January 1st. But I think with the amendments that were made to it, both in the Senate and the Assembly, that I think we'll be okay. The other bill that is tied to that is, I believe it's AB 349, and there's some duplicative language, but they addressed it in each bill that they cancel each other out. One will take hold and the other won't. So. The minimum wage, health professionals and interns was ordered to the inactive file at the request of Assemblymember Thurman, the author. There's no update as to whether that's going to be moving forward in the future or not. But I know that was one that had been brought to the attention by the CPTA. But other than that, unless you have any other questions.
Any questions or comments for Jason? By the board? Any public comment? Okay, thank you, Jason. And while we still have an audience, is it okay to move on to, or will we have time for rulemaking? Or should we hold that for
I think my recommendation for rulemaking is probably to hold off until
after lunch?
after lunch or the presentation by Maximus.
Okay. So we have a choice to go back into closed session and have a working lunch or go into lunch and come back and have the presentation by Maximus. Any thoughts by the board? Anyone want to have a working lunch and go back into closed session or wait?
They're a helpful bunch this
Yeah.
morning.
If we have the time, we can take a lunch. If we don't have the time, let's take a working lunch.
It sounds like we have the time.
So go into closed session.
Time to have a lunch. That's what TJ was
Oh,
saying.
TJ wants lunch.
TJ wants lunch.
What do you say?
Okay. So at this time, we'll adjourn for lunch, and what's a good time to come back? It's 11:40 now.
If you don't mind, before we adjourn,
Sure.
only because we have an audience that might be shy when you say any public comment, maybe there's an opportunity for them to ask any other kind of questions.
Yeah. Any questions or concerns or curiosities for the board from the public?
Only one question.
Come on up to the microphone.
Oh. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Vincent.
We got a only question.
And you can introduce yourself.
I'm Melissa, and I'm student physical therapy assistant program. And I have only one question to ask. What are you guys discussing when you have closed session? What are you discussing about?
Good question.
It is a good question.
Good question. Disciplinary matters. So, anything from a proposed decision written by an administrative law judge or this board regarding a licensee's actions that may have led them, down the wrong road and into a little bit of trouble, and the deliberations that come with that, decide, how best to handle them, or through a stipulated settlement, an agreement with that licensee on how to handle them. But we go into closed session for the board members to determine whether or not they agree with those stipulated settlements or their proposed decisions, and if not, what to do with it. Set their own conditions of probation or things like that, things that they think might be appropriate to the allegation for that person or the actions of that person.
And what is the percentage of those cases that...
So we only meet 4 times a year, and we almost always have closed sessions. So I know that makes it seem like there's a lot, but there's also almost 40,000 of you as licensees between PTs and PTAs. And so if we're only discussing 2 or 3 cases at each meeting, if you think about that, it's a really low number. The number of violators is extremely low.
Thank you.
One of the things that I would add to just kind of put you at ease a little bit too is how limited what we can discuss in closed session. I mean, you don't leave so quickly. I'm not that. No, I appreciate your question, because closed session would sound like, okay, now they're going to go talk about things in secret. And it's very limited. I mean, legal counsel could certainly give you a better summary, but we have very few things that we actually can talk about in closed session. The discipline is one of those rare things. Otherwise, the purpose is everything is out for you to see the deliberation and the thought process that goes behind any policies that get made, any changes to regulation, anything that would affect your license. You're going to have the ability to hear that discussion. So closed session isn't the ability for us to have those discussions behind closed doors. It really is. Everything is really out in the open for you.
The number of different things that the board can discuss in closed session can fit on one hand, and most of it is discipline, the evaluation of the executive officer, discussions about the creation of the examination process, which, because of what you're discussing, you can't discuss it in an open forum. It might give too many things away. And there may be a few others. that are carved out in the APA for closed session, but very limited. Everything that the board does is very transparent.
And then, even then, if you are curious about exactly what the board is talking about in closed session, the board's required to give notice about what they're talking about at least 10 days in advance of the meeting, and that's our agenda. And the board goes to great lengths to ensure that the agenda accurately reflects what it is they're going to be talking about at the board meeting. So even though they cut into closed session, if you look at the agenda, for example, on today, agenda item 6, it describes that the purpose of the closed session is to talk about disciplinary actions and decisions, as well as perform a performance evaluation of the executive officer. So that's what's on our agenda item for this 2-day meeting. So, yeah.
And one more question. Are you guys paid for doing this job?
I'm going to say yes and no. So board members conducting board business can receive a per diem. So for the days that they actually do business, the maximum they can receive is $100 a day. And then travel expenses and that kind of thing, when we bring them from long distances, the state compensates them for that. But other than that, no, there's no salary for board members.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on Dr. Alviso's comment, when you attend the meetings and you can hear the discussion, you hear me say, or someone say, the president say, is there any public comment? And we welcome very much what you have to say and your ideas. So you're a big part of what we will consider as well. Does anyone else have any other questions? That was a really good question. Any other comments?
This meeting is a little bit different than most. Normally, the first day of a meeting, we actually have hearings that involve licensees either asking for a reduction in penalty of their existing probation or reinstatement of a revoked license. And that's always something that I think is valuable for students to see. It's also probably a good thing to say we didn't have to have that today, right? Because that's a good trend to tout. But I'd almost feel bad if I said, it's too bad we don't have something like that to show you today. But we don't. But having said that, we archive these webcasts. So if that's something that interests you, and I would encourage you to do it, you can go to the board's website and look up, well, especially maybe the last couple times we've been so lonely, and watch the first part of each board meeting to kind of see what that experience is like. I mean, it'll give you an idea what the adjudication process looks like in administrative law, but also to know that should anything like that ever happen, you as a licensee have due process just like you would anywhere else with property rights, and you could find yourself coming before a panel of 7 people, 4 of which are professionals like you. And so it's almost a trial by your peers, if you will. So it's a beautiful system. It works extremely well. And it's something that you kind of have to see firsthand. So if you go back and take the time to watch it on the website, I'd highly encourage it. And there are these blue buttons on our website with an F on them. So if you click those, it'll take you to Facebook, and you can like the page. And there's about a dozen of you in the room today. So I'll see a dozen likes in the next couple hours. So, thank you.
I have a question for you. What is your understanding of what the board does?
Outreach.
Laws and regulations for the physical therapy community.
Safety.
Yeah, protection of the consumer is the primary mandate.
I have another question. Because if you're not questioning us, we're going to question you. Do you know how we get evaluated? Yeah, like how the boards function. because earlier on the executive officer mentioned the sunset review process. And that is how the board actually gets evaluated. And if you listen or, the executive officer pointed that this board in particular just went through that process and was asked by the Department of Consumer Affairs to actually, give pointers to other boards that will be going through this sunset review process next year. Because this was one of the times that we did well, to say the least. And I think those things never get really said. That's why I wanted to point it out that the board members and the board staff made that possible through a whole lot of work that happens mostly behind the scenes. And if you ever have an opportunity to watch a sunset review of other boards, then you'll certainly get an idea of the work it takes, and that it is mostly voluntary. And we love what we do, I think, if I speak for all of us on the board. And that's why the board is doing good work, in my opinion. But I'm extremely biased.
The laws and regulations that you were talking about, if you actually look at them, they come with an expiration date, right? So we have the authority right now, well, until 2022. But up until about 45 days ago, our authority actually expired January 1st of 2018, right? Once we get close to our expiration date, we have to put together what's called a sunset report. And the legislature provides us with a questionnaire. And it's a way for the legislature to determine whether or not it's still necessary to have this profession regulated. And the questionnaire is everything from, how you handle your money, or how you handle your discipline, or how you handle public relations and those kind of things. And so the compilation of the report itself takes about 9 months and involves pretty much every one of my staff at some point through the process. We put that report together, and then we go before the legislature in a hearing, and they're going to ask us a couple questions based on what that report generated. Our report was really good, and this board is very mindful of its mandate of consumer protection. And the issue that has come to light recently is that some boards have a hard time balancing consumer protection and professional advocacy, right? And there's some Supreme Court decisions that have been handed down as a result of actions of other states, not California, that have really created a nationwide controversy. So this sunset process that we just went through was even more sensitive than most, and we still came out unscathed on the other side, because we always hold that prime directive of consumer protection, consumer protection, consumer protection. So. But you can watch webcasts of the sunset hearings too, if you like. As licensees, I'm always going to encourage you to know, from the top down, what the regulation of the practice looks like. It'll benefit you tremendously.
I'll just add that on this board, we have 4 licensed members, and we have 3 public members. And the public members bring a perspective that's very much welcomed, since we wear our physical therapy hat. It's nice to have the public members on this board representing their perspective as well. It brings a nice balance.
And the way we get on the board is that we're appointed. The 4 PT members were appointed by the governor. One of the public members is appointed by the governor. And then the other 2 public members are appointed by I believe it's the Senate Pro Tem, and then the Assembly. I don't remember if
It's not the speaker.
It's not the speaker of the Assembly, but it's another office holder in the Assembly. So we're appointed by those people, by those legislators, for a 4-year term.
Does that bring about any other questions or curiosities that you might have?
or you apply for that?
Yeah, so there is an application process, and you can go to the governor's website and apply to be a board member. As a professional, one of the requirements is that you have to be within the profession licensed without any kind of sanctions for 5 years. And then after 5 years, you can apply to be a member to your particular profession. As a licensed professional in the healthcare system, you can't be a member on any other licensing board. You can be a public member, but you kind of get excluded because of your professional licensure from that. They're really looking for as little bias as they possibly can. So after 5 years of licensure, it's definitely something. It's a way that you can contribute back to the profession, but also to the consumers of California as well.
And I would just add something to, excuse me, Mr. Kaiser's comments. Or you can receive a phone call from the governor's office, specifically the appointment secretary, out of the blue, asking if you'd be interested in applying. That would be my
happens too
story.
sometimes. That also happens a lot with the Senate and the Assembly side too. So there's really no application process there. Sometimes you're recruited or voluntold.
And I have no regrets whatsoever. It's been a great experience for me. So
We could hear that in your voice.
And the composition of the board right now, Jason, is 4 physical therapists and 3 public members.
Yes.
So as the composition sits right now, no physical therapist assistants.
No. And there is nothing in our Practice Act that would allow for that currently. It would actually require legislative change for that to happen.
Good questions. Any further discussion or questions? Thank you for participating with us and for being here. It's 11:55 and we will stop for our lunch break and resume maybe about 1 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Okay.
At 1 o'clock, if you guys are free, we have a presentation from the board's drug rehabilitation management. Yeah, class 1. All right. Watch it on the webcast.
Like it on Facebook.
Yeah. Like it on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube.
Okay, we're back on record and it is 12:59 and we're going to start with agenda item number 8 with our Maximus presentation. And do we need time, Jason?
Just a minute or two, so. I'll have Stephanie Trump come up as the presenter for Maximus, and then I'd ask the board members to take a seat in the audience. We're going to fire up a PowerPoint presentation.
It's been a great honor to be here to serve you. I hope you can hear me. I'm dealing with a few allergy issues, so if I get a little soft, please raise your hand, and I'm happy to speak a little bit louder. It is a distinct honor for me to speak to you. I'm with Maximus. As you know, we have the contract for the case manager of your physical therapy board's diversion program. A little bit about myself. I am a registered nurse, obviously at one. I've been almost 40 years now in nursing. I'm a certified addictions RN. That's an international certification. And I'm also a licensed advanced alcohol drug counselor in the state of California and internationally. And so this is my field. I like seeing people get their lives back. So I'll be talking to you about the issue of substance use disorders and physical therapy and what you, the board, have to offer to participate in. Okay. So I don't know if the lights will be on. know, thank you. Can you, I'm not getting contact here with this one.
That's not bad.
Yeah, I wouldn't. What do we do? Okay, let's go back. Okay. All right, I happen to also be a psychiatric nurse, and we kind of do things a bit on the edge here, so nothing harmful. And I realize it's right after lunch, so if you happen to fall asleep, maybe someone next week can help with you. But I do invite you for just a minute to close your eyes with me as I paint a picture. You don't have to, you're completely safe, there's nothing weird that's going to happen. But I would like for you to imagine that sitting through this time, that the governor found some money for you. I know, use your imagination here. But, and you all get a $100 gift certificate to go to your local mall here while you're here after the meeting. But you have to spend it today. And so you get out late, it's starting to get dark, you found some good sales, you're walking back to your car, and you have this sudden awareness that there's an addict walking behind you. So you pick up your pace, you walk a little quicker, you hear the footsteps a little quicker, you are fumbling around for your key fob, you find your car, you throw everything in, you lock your doors, and please open your eyes. How many picture a physical therapist? Oh. How many picture a labor and delivery nurse? Oh. We don't picture healthcare professionals with problems. Just out of curiosity, what gender did you picture? Anybody picture a woman? My goodness, so such a surprise. And was this gentleman cleanly shaven in a three-piece suit? It's interesting, I have the pleasure of presenting to treatment centers as well. I mean, we work in the field, and they still run with a lot of stereotypes. So this is what I'm about to talk about, the dark side, if you would, of being a healthcare professional and some of the risks involved. So you have information there, and I'm hoping this will work for me. Okay, there we go. As you can see, perception and reality don't always fit. And our culture runs like this. And people who have a substance use disorder with actual problems called addiction, they hide in shame because people do not understand that no one asks for an addiction. Not even healthcare professionals, not even physical therapists. So I want to bring that up because often we think differently. And expectations are different, of course. All right. So I want to talk about signs and symptoms and the impact of substance use in the workplace, what used to be called addictions, now called substance use disorders. What is the diversion, your diversion program? And you all know it, but still, I'm going to give you some of the ins and outs of what I do as your case manager. This might hit some buttons in somebody, some nerves as far as history. It's intended to inform only and not to harm ever. We are all impacted by substance use disorders, and I just wanted to bring that up. Objections, the history, the mission, the structure of your program. You probably all know this, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but the role of the worksite monitor when a physical therapist goes back to work. Okay, these are the 8 of the healthcare professional boards that Maximus has the honor of serving through the Department of Consumer Affairs. Oops, hold on, let's go back one here. Okay. Substance use disorder. By the way, I use the word addict. That's the only time you're going to hear me use it. Because labels belong on cans, not on people. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association changed the verbiage. It's like calling someone a cancer. It is a disease. The severe end of substance use disorders are a full-fledged disease. We know the etiology. We know how it starts. We know the clinical course. We know how it ends. It ends in death. A substance use disorder is like a terrorist. It hits good people and they don't even know what happened. This is not a moral issue. This is not, I don't know why they can't just put the thing in the bottle and walk away. At the extreme of this spectrum disorder, people's brains get hijacked. The prefrontal cortex, the thinking, the executive order part of the brain gets hijacked. and they can't stop. People don't have a drinking problem, they have a stopping problem, as with other substances. And I just want to bring that out. Now, here are 3 patients. This woman here has terminal cancer in her last days. This little guy has PKU, which is a metabolic disorder, and he's healthy there, but if his parents aren't mindful of how he eats, he will have brain damage, and it can ultimately kill him. And this man, he has a substance use disorder. Labels belong in cans and not on people. Prevalence, often there's a strong genetic influence. Not always, but often. That's the case. It can be sometimes permanent damage, depending on the drug. Alcohol, generally, unless it's a very extreme syndrome, there can often be a lot of regeneration. One of the worst ones is ecstasy, the party drug, and huffing in a paper bag. Those go right to the brain. They can really do a lot of permanent damage. I'm going to go through a lot of slides here, so I'll try to speed talk. The risk in the general public, depending on the study that you read, usually 10%, some will go as far as 14%. Statistically, with healthcare professionals, it can go up to 20%. These are not bad people making bad choices. These are unhealthy people making unhealthy choices. In our program, as you can see, 60 to 70% the first 4 years, you'll see those are national averages. In the diversion program, 13% is our 4-year rate. Generally, it's in the first 6 months of someone coming into the program. We believe in a comprehensive program that's extensive, but it also has the therapeutic model built into it. Okay. And as you can see here, return to work and sexual. These are interesting enough. It follows the same clinical pathways, all of these diseases. Okay. No one asks for hypertension, asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and nobody asks for these things. And yet the clinical pathway of a substance use disorder is the same route. With help, with support, it can be managed. So, bring that up. Clicker does not want it. There we go. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why healthcare professionals are at a higher risk of a substance use disorder, we hurt people. Not that other people aren't hurt people. I don't have to tell you, physical therapists, you who are practicing in the field, you will do anything for your patient. I don't ever have to ask a physical therapist, how are you going to help someone today? I do have to ask your physical therapist on our program, how are you going to remember yourself in there? How do you put yourself in the equation? You all, like we, nurses, we're trained to take care of the world. We don't have a clue about taking care of ourselves often. And that brings a vulnerability. Because as heart people, we don't know how to take care of our own heart. And that can get us in trouble. Okay. Again, we are outward focused. We're trained to take care of the patient. We tend to look at our environment. Where can we serve? What can we're always assessing? You're all assessing me, I'm sure, as I am you. So, we're just trained that way. We are outward focused, and we often develop a huge imbalance in that we are so sensitive to the outside, and we are not sensitive to the inside. What's going on inside of us? So that can put someone at a greater risk for a substance use problem. You see trauma just like nurses see trauma. Sometimes the trauma looks a little different, but it can be vicarious through patients. It can be outward, overtly that you see trauma. Anyone working in a hospital as a physical therapist sees trauma, okay? And often in clinics. And so that has to go somewhere. Trauma has to go somewhere. Generally, we stuff it down. We're not taught how to work it through. And it's got to go somewhere, and often it comes out in an unhealthy way. Overachievers, oh yes. Of all of the physical therapists on my caseload, and shout out to Monty, who is an awesome department manager for you. 103% are overachievers, okay? And this, again, there's a difference between perfectionism and excellence, and we shoot for perfectionism often. It's such a slave driver. And so it's usually the employee of the day, week, month, quarter, year. They are so selfless. They work all these shifts and blah, 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 and this and that. And I'm like, can we get a drug test on that person? Something's keeping them going. Okay. And we are really good at hiding, being, behind the intellectual mask. We can all intellectualize why we do what we do. I've learned, I've had the privilege of being your clinical case manager since March. And I have learned in the course of my journey here with you that physical therapists are so good at disconnecting with themselves, like the rest of us, and it's so easy to intellectualize a response. I go a lot deeper than that with them, and I'm grateful to build that trust and in order to know what's really going on. But so many of us, we can hide behind our intellectual mask. We see values in what we do. And for many of us, we run with being a human doing versus a human being. And our profession is so dear to us that it's tied in with our ego structure. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to help. It's just that we are more than just a doing or a being. And often self-care is lacking. Trained to be leaders, as you know, I'll have to explain this to you. Trained to be leaders. And leaders will often have unrealistic expectations of themselves. They don't want to let anybody down. But again, there's that disconnect inside the outward person and the inward not playing on the same team as you would. Healthcare professionals, they do not explode, they implode. A healthcare professional can be dying in front of you and you would not know it. You know why? Because we're way too considerate. We would say they have their own problems. Why would they want to hear ours? Plus the shame. The shame of having a substance use problem is so terrifying and painful to people. It is not the outcome, but the fear of exposure that puts good physical therapists who have a substance use disorder literally on the edge and often with suicide because they don't have the toolkit to deal with it. And so we really come down to the three. The attitude, not, attitude, but, the attitude of, I'm around it all the time, it's not a big deal, it's accessibility. Generally, with physical therapists, it is not about, taking medications from anywhere in the hospital or anything like that. I find often with physical therapists is, what do I do after shift? How do I relax? How do I sleep? I put in a lot of hours. My own body takes a hit with taking care of others. Those kind of things often get PTs in trouble. High stress, I don't have to tell you about that. There's a little bit of stress in being a physical therapist today. So, okay. The immunity is just, again, that overachieving part, but somehow it's not going to affect me. Powerful substances, kind of being insensitive to anything, including like if someone gets hurt. When somebody gets hurt, they usually go to employee health. And anybody idea what they get at employee health? Anybody? Medication-wise? They usually get like a Norco. It's like a Vicodin on steroids, a little more potent. It's interesting that the MBA students studied Vicodin. Not because of the drug, but because of the outreach. I mean, they permeated our society, every doctor's office, every clinic, every hospital. It became as common as Starbucks and a coffee shop. Okay, and it minimized the capacity. Hydrocodone can be dangerous, but often people are given medication and they say take 2 weeks off. Well, they're feeling a little bit better a couple of days later, and they think we're already understaffed, and what am I going to do? So they go back to work, they take the medicine. Pretty soon, there's changes in the brain, and they don't even see it coming. So that can often happen. And again, the shame, the denial. There's the physical component, the withdrawal itself, depending on the drug. With alcohol, even up to 14 days in the danger zone of severe drinking to avoid seizures. But generally with opioids, about 72 hours. Stimulants, people just sleep it off. The physical component can end pretty quickly, but there is a syndrome called PAWS, or post-acute withdrawal syndrome, that can last actually up to 18 months after use. It's at times when the brain is sensitive to rebooting, if you will. It's a time where relapse is a little greater risk, and we're aware of that and work with participants. The psychological component, this is a lot in our culture. Going a half the hour after the gang to get together. You know, I always, when I have a chance to talk with PTs, I always urge them to consider them out for coffee. You know, do decaf if it's the end of the day shift or whatever. We do that culturally, and it's not that drinking is bad. Excessive drinking is bad. And there may be somebody in that group that has an alcohol problem. But because they're hard, they don't want to say no to tea. And they can be inadvertently affecting them. Healthcare professionals have to let down in some way. Very often there will be the use of a drug, use of a substance such as alcohol to help them sleep or to get rid of what they saw. Again, statistically 60% come from trauma. And we go into this field, and what are we often exposed to? Trauma. And then we work overtime. When healthcare professionals feel stressed, we overwork. We'll just work more. So we're working more and we're exposing ourselves more to trauma. And so you can see the vicious cycle that nobody asks for. Terrific. Apologize, this thing isn't. Oh, there we go. Okay. Real quickly, guilt and shame. I want to talk about this because this is a part of it. Okay, guilt in a nutshell means I've done something bad. Let's take, for example, say I got here early, which I did. I didn't want to walk in until you jerked me on. Say I was really, really hungry, and I went over there and I stole a candy bar. Well, number one, I don't steal. It's against my values. Number two, I don't eat candy bars. And but say I did, and I feel really, really bad, and I go and give them a lot of money and say I did something stupid. I want to make it right. Guilt always wants to make things right. They want to even it out. So guilt says I've done something bad. There is a type of shame that says I am something bad. And for some of us, we grew up with that. We were not as good at it. We did not get the message that we were valuable people. And so if somebody grows up with what we call toxic shame, or I'm less than, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. We tend to do overdrive in everything we do to hide our shame. And for many people, they suffer from this all their whole life. Some of these coping mechanisms, because this is often a big component of the symptoms of what we'll see in the substance use disorder. Anger, not everybody who's got a bad attitude has a substance use problem. But, you know, people that will keep people at bay with their anger, because if you got close to me, you wouldn't like me. So they make sure everybody stays away. Again, the control freaks, it's not just us nurses who are control freaks. I've kind of noticed that some PTs may fall into that because we're leaders, right? Yeah, well, yeah, it's just a little secret in the profession. But you know what I'm saying? Some people take this to the nth degree, and they want to control everything. And often they're running, again, with that toxic shame perfectionism I've tuned into already. If it's not a 10, it might as well be a 1. And for many of us, we don't know the difference between excellence, good enough, and perfectionism. Perfectionism is indeed a slave driver. Grandiosity, the best of the best or the worst of the worst. Minimizing over anything, overreacting about any little thing, blaming, over buying. Some people, I won't ask for him, some people have a bad day, they'll hit the Haagen-Dazs, they'll overeat, they'll overspend, they'll take a credit card and go up to just because it makes them feel better. There's a lot of over things out there. Again, with healthcare professionals, we overwork, and we get paid for it and get accolades and things like that. But you'll find that sometimes. It is not the physical quantity of a drug that becomes a problem. It is the progression of the relationship between that person and that substance. What does that mean to somebody? That's the real issue. Okay, let's go back. I want to give you, there's a priority slide here. For some experimental, that's generally not with the licensed physical therapist or a PTA. But you'll just see, often we're on a college campus, there's a lot of that goes on here. Priorities, family, friends, just kind of get the stress off kind of thing. But as there's continued to use, because again, the happy hour thing is a thing. It happens, and healthcare professionals get together and sometimes drink too much. And so, at any rate, that's going on. Pretty soon you're seeing, maybe they get a DUI, then they get a letter to come join us from your board. But if someone gets a DUI, doesn't necessarily mean on the spectrum, they're way over here, but that they have some hazardous drinking going on. And pretty soon maybe some new friends come along. The abuse starts in stage 3. You can see the priorities on the bottom are starting to change. Again, our marquee in our minds is not register. Hey, be careful out there. And by stage 4, this is again the brain is hijacked at that point. There's a high suicide risk and accidental overdose, just used to feel normal so that they don't fall into withdrawal. And so people coming in are reaching for normal, whatever normal is. What is enabling? This comes into play because in the profession, because we're heart people, we help each other out. We're French buddies. I don't know about you, when I was in nursing school, we had to start IVs on each other. We had a barbaric nursing program back east. But I'm saying, you don't want to hurt somebody on your team. And for many, some people know there's a problem. But they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be wrong and they don't want to accuse anybody, and they'll end up doing other people's work. And so what happens is that continues the process. This happens in every clinic, in every county, in our country. Because people may have a problem, and when they're on your team, it's just easy to write off, well, they're just having a bad day. I'll help them out or whatever. And that can actually delay the problem and make it worse. So enabling, some have heard the golden rule. Enabling is basically doing for others what one should do for yourself. Because we're hurt people. We get that mixed up sometimes. And allowing it to continue is a problem. And that's where outreach comes in. Actually, I was waiting. I bounced upstairs, talked with some of the PT students who were here, gave them my card. They're like, oh, there's a lecture at 1 p.m. Talk our well, that didn't work, but I did give them my card. Because one of the things we do as a courtesy is we go to students, before they crash and burn, to say, hey, if you have a problem, here's how you can get help now. Because your board cares about you, and they want you healthy, and we want you healthy. And that's one thing as a service in Maximus we do. So just to let you know that. Drinking, again, to the happy hour after work, the de-stress. Some will join, like their spouse maybe having a problem. They end up joining in, thinking that will help, but it doesn't. And so not following through. Okay, so these are just some symptoms. We look for patterns. These, for those who work in the front line. Now, not everybody's defensive has a substance use disorder, but just if there's changes in behavior, not everyone who doesn't have eye contact has a substance use disorder. But there's just some ideas there. Again, we're looking for patterns, late to work, maybe they're immature, maybe they need an alarm clock, whatever. But I'm just saying, but if there is a change, the increased isolation, problems, reports from families, complaints, those are pay attention types of situations as those continue. These are pretty more significant symptoms, the manageability. Obviously, if someone's rapid speech, unless they're giving a presentation, trying to get their slides all in, you're going to see that. Sweat, history of back and orthopedic injury. Why this is important is because of the fact that you receive wear and tear as you help somebody else. You all know that. I'm just amazed at how physical therapists who do take care of themselves can just really do such a great job. It's one thing to have the intellectual information and another thing self-application. But the use of pain medication can escalate, like I said, particularly if there's an injury and you want to get back to work or you are back to work and not paying attention to your own care. So, okay. Again, tripping, this may be due to an impairment or result from taking medication and running into problems. Kind of be aware of things. emergency department trips on the weekends. Our program, is quite comprehensive. And if someone has to go on a weekend to a physician, we need the emergency room slip, we need medication. They have to let them know that they're in a program and that they're in recovery. So we can point that out. Most people do not self-refer. Some do, but most don't. So where board complaints come in, what we do when somebody comes in, I will do an intake on the phone, recognizing that the person on the other end is what I call emotionally hemorrhaging. They're so frightened. They don't know me from Adam. They just know they need help. They know that they've been reported, that often statutory agreement, and they don't know what to do next. And so as a nurse, I use a national tool, Addiction Severity Index, and make recommendations. I call Lonnie, give clinical recommendations, and we take it from there. From there, people go to a clinical assessor. This is a licensed therapist who has expertise in substance use disorders as well to do a face-to-face, a little more in-depth than the phone interview. And then together we'll make a plan of care for this particular participant. So we point them to recovery, and it is baby steps to recovery. Recovery is often misunderstood, whereas substance use disorders is a terrorist that takes things away. Recovery is all about integration. It is about wellness and health. Where someone has lost a lot, this is about restoring the person, okay, and getting them literally back on their feet. But also to learn how to do life in a different way, how to manage the stress in a different way, like life principles. The 12 steps of recovery, there's nothing mystical about it. It is 12 ways of doing good principles for life. Where people learn to trust one more person who's a sponsor, who's gone through the process. We send them to meetings, AA, NA, depending on whatever issue they come in with. Often they'll go to therapy as well. And very often there's unresolved grief, and so we want to make sure that's taken care of. Anything stuffed down is going to come back. Feelings buried alive are still alive, and we know that. And so it's learning how to do life differently, like a whole different mindset, and that takes time. So with support, with folks, we're getting reports from therapists, often from treatment, from wherever we help to get people back on their feet. We teach them about awareness, and what that means. You can't educate the unconscious. First, you need to know what's going on inside. Most of us don't. We resort to that four-letter F word, fine, when somebody asks us. And so we teach them about awareness inside and their surroundings, and again, not to react, but to respond based on principles. It takes time to change a worldview, but once it is accomplished, it is amazing. Integration, work and balance, having work and a life. There you go. And so that's one of the reasons there is a restriction on practice, especially early on. Sometimes as they continue, they're allowed to do overtime hours, but again, we teach about the balance so that it doesn't overwhelm and that recovery doesn't lose its priority and connection. Substance use disorder is a disease of isolation, and so we talk about connection a lot. Okay, it's a long and winding road. There's cravings, there's triggers, there's relapse, but we do not judge. I'm a clinician, just like you, and it's not about judgment. This is somebody getting well. And once the pathology, if you will, is treated, we're looking to wellness, and that's full wellness. And that's part of what we do at Maximus. You know this better than I do, the rehabilitation. We have abstinence-based. People can't have any alcohol, can't have any sleep medications that are mind-altering, Lunesta, Ambien. By the way, those things are nasty. They can really harm people. Evaluations, and we have that accountability. Okay. You know the goals: to protect the public, to return the healthcare professionals to safe practice, and to assist in long-term recovery practices. This is what goes on. You can see all the connections. you are the board, and then I work directly with Monty. The healthcare support group, these are generally licensed therapists, or they may be very seasoned California alcohol drug counselors. They meet starting twice a week, and then after 12 months they go to once a week. The participant pays for it. It's with other healthcare professionals who are in recovery. The Board of Nursing has their own nurse support group leader. Okay, all right. So program needs a mission. They have to live here, obviously. If they have substance use disorder with a mental illness, again, we're going to pay attention to that in treatment planning. Some do, some don't. And we don't put a gun to their head. They can join us if they want to. If they don't, they will call you. So if they've previously been terminated from somewhere else in a state, and usually can't, if they're selling drugs that they've taken, they generally can't, or if a patient dies, then more likely you're not going to send them our way. You know this better than I do. Stipulated orders, generally how we get folks. This is sort of the pathway, whether they come in by voluntary or probation referral. We remove them from work. Senate Bill 1441 requires us to do that. Until that actually will be reviewed, at least the frequency of testing will be reviewed. The governor signed a law this year, and all the boards will get together again to look at the frequency. Generally it takes 3 to 5 years, depending on the compliance of the individual. We have to take them off of work for at least 30 days testing by California law now, and then I talk with Monty, approving them to go back to work, and we have a plan restricted practice. The initial costs, nothing to call me, clinical assessment, no charge to the applicant. They call me weekly until I get together with Monty and review. Your team does it in absentia, so we don't actually see the participants. I try to visit as many healthcare groups that I can, so that they can see my face. So I often go to the secondary ones so that they can be more acquainted with who I am. Some of the boards, the participant comes to the meeting. So we have that. And work. I'm cooking. Doesn't like me. All right, there we go. Okay, so we send them to AA meetings. Generally, they start out doing 90 meetings in 90 days to establish a good base in recovery. They get a sponsor, same gender, at least 5 years of sobriety. Statistically, if someone is not relapsed in 5 years, their chances of long-term sobriety is much better. And then they meet, aside from the meetings, with this person who will navigate them through the 12 steps of recovery. The health support group, the random testing, they have to check in every day. If they miss a check-in, it's presumed guilt, and so, or miss a test. Statistically, if they miss a test, their chances of relapse are much higher. But even if they miss a check-in call, we take them off of work until 2 negative results are reported by the testing group, First Source. And so you see all this when they come back in. There is a worksite monitor. This is a person who generally is one step up. If they have their own practice, it's another physical therapist willing to come once a week to meet with them, review files, to have a face-to-face, and that person sends reports to me. So these are some of the things that they do. The journey, the last 12 months, they have what we call transition, few less restrictions. By the end, there's overtime, as long as they want to. They don't go to the health support group anymore, although many will, because it's a good source of support for them. And they write almost like an autobiography about their journey and what's changed, and a personal relapse prevention plan. And they do a workbook, and they submit a synopsis of the workbook, relapse prevention therapy. And so it's quite an ordeal, but it helps people to have a game plan from beyond our program. And so successful completion, they can't relapse. If they do relapse, we don't consider that a horrific criminal activity. to consider it a need for a higher level of care. Often they'll go back into residential treatment if somebody relapses. If at the very beginning, they relapse and before they're in back to work, we'll send them to a higher level of care. And have to complete at least 24 months of negative urine. Okay, so costs, you see those ones are free. Treatment costs, if someone has insurance, if they're not, if they don't, some of the counties will have programs if they're asking for intensive outpatient treatment or residential. Still clicking. Okay, here we go. Okay. This is an example of residential treatment. Betty Ford is one of the top of the line. It is not cheap. Some are less expensive. Some counties are required to assist if someone has no insurance. Some counties are poor and they're on waiting lists a long time, but others have already received treatment before they even come to us. As you can see, the difference in the costs of being in this program. Health support group, generally physical therapists, you see what they pay, $358 a month to be in the program. Along with that, they have to pay for health support group. That generally runs about $350 a month that they pay along with that. The random testing, the analysis costs $62.50. To leave the test at the lab can go as high as $100. And so 100 plus, and they're tested 52 times a year in the first year. That gets a little pricey. And so that's what they have collection fee again, depending on if we send them to psychiatrists, they will pay for whatever treatment themselves, counseling as well. So that's a little breakdown of the cost for participants to be in this program. But recovery does work. We believe in it, we stand by it, so seeing lives heal through it. And but that, that's if you need to send anybody our way, I did bring my cards. Happy to answer any questions. If there's anything that I can do to be of service to you. And I've thrown a lot at you.
You shed a lot of light onto a topic that we didn't have a lot of exposure to. That several of us, at least, have not had much exposure to at all. So, thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a great pleasure. Anything else? I know that you can think of anything you want us to change or do differently. Monty's your man, as you know, and I am here at your service. And I just want to let you know, if there's any conferences that you know of that I can connect with to do outreach, I'm happy to do that. Schools, like I said, I just wander around here and try to at least start an outreach here for physical therapy students.
Can you shed light on how do you decide as basic as you can, shed light on when is someone suffer from a substance use disorder and then enters the program? Because we've had some cases where people were referred to the program and then after an evaluation process they say this candidate is not a substance, does not suffer from a substance abuse disorder, and then we puzzle.
Got it. I'd be eligible, clinically ineligible.
The whole clinical backdrop to it, because they may have 2 or 3 DUIs. This is real life.
Yes.
Yeah.
With someone who has 1 DUI, substance use disorders is now spectrum disease, and the DSM-5 that came out changed things around a little bit. There's a zone called hazardous drinking, for example, and then there's actual alcoholism. So it's a spectrum disease, and with that, a lot has to depend on their symptoms. Have they relapsed since their last drink, their withdrawal, those kind of things. For someone who has just had 1 DUI, there is no DSM-5 diagnosis with dumb decision. You know, there are people at a wedding and they drink too much, and on the way home they got a DUI, and they come to your attention, to the Department of Justice. And so, you know, for those, they may not have a substance use disorder, an actual disorder. It is a bad decision. And for those having more than one DUI, I would really look at that, because statistically, if someone has more than one, they are further down on the spectrum. It takes a lot of work to get a DUI in California. We have fewer police officers on roads, CHPs. And so because of that, it is a little different for someone who may have had a substance use disorder 10 years ago, and then they went to, you know, physical therapy school, they've been in recovery. That is, again, a clinical variable that may have them say clinically ineligible. I mean, the guy's already doing great, he's working a program, you know, he's not as high a risk because he's dealing with what he's dealing with. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I hope.
Partly, because this is a thing that we sit on quite often when we deliberate on some of the cases.
Sure.
So one thing that, you know, we would have the experience of someone coming before the board, and, you know, you can see that they're not accepting personal responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
There's certain, you know, things that raises red flags, not taking personal responsibility. They don't really feel like they have a problem. They may have 2 DUIs, and now Maximus, through how they judged them, evaluated them. I've always wondered, can you get through the Maximus test with just a really great personality and work through that? You know,
not with this case manager.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel our experience of someone and what the counselor may see as something different. Because we see 2 things. We may see someone in person, or we may see the whole history of it.
Sure.
And then we see, but, you know, and then they are very confident that we don't have a problem. Why is the board going on about this?
I understand. I get it. And I can't speak for former clinical case managers. One thing that helps, I know when there's a stipulated agreement, we have that. If there isn't, any information money can head my way helps as well, especially with history. It's not just what we do on the phone, but they do the face-to-face with the counselor, again, who has generally expertise in the field of substance use disorders. The more than one concerns me. You know, I've seen the one DUI, you know, where often, like I said, it does not sound. We don't always have all of the history. The history we have is often through the licensee themselves. If there isn't a complaint filed, if it's a self-referral, any information that we do have helps to make a better understanding. We do it that way. I can't speak again to my the past assigned folks. I just know for me, mine are long. If you ever see my notes, I kind of write a book when I do intake. That one I like to evaluate everything, knowing that about 50% of it may or may not be accurate because someone's afraid and wants to say the right thing and, you know, do that kind of thing. And so a lot of times I will, you know, recommend, you know, I talk with the assessor because they get my intake, my intake note, the clinical assessor. They don't get my feelings about it. They just get my note. You know, they'll get the summary of what I saw. And then they are trying to do their best to be objective in what other information they get face to face. I would be interested in learning a little bit more about what you're discussing because I think, you know, to protect the public and also for the sake of the licensee, because this will kill them if they don't manage it, it will manage them. And not everybody who drinks has a drinking problem. Not everyone who makes a dumb decision has, like, say, a drinking. I find primarily, it's been my experience thus far, alcohol is usually what brings folks in from your board. Only at one with heroin. We may see more. statistically, 80% of those who overdose on heroin start with prescription pain medication. So there you go. Nobody's immune from that. So it depends too on the drug. When was their last drink? Actual drink? Was there testing? We are now, well, Monty now is, as people coming in doing a PET test, which is a blood test that could go back 21 days. It actually is will show up on a red blood cells who lives not that long to find out if they drank any alcohol. Okay, if there is binging, sometimes it'll be a binge situation, again, not every day or week, but if someone has been binging in the past 21 days, if they have an actual problem and they're probably drinking within 21 days, we'll pick it up on the PET. Also do a hair test, which will show other things. Not so great with alcohol with the hair test, but other substances will show up, other drugs will show up. That goes back 90 days. And unless somebody really shaves the head and arms, we had one actually did that. So we wait for it to grow back before we do. God, don't do that if you want to join our program. So, at any rate, I hear your dilemma, sir, and I'm not sure that I'm answering it fully, but at any time, you can try to send them our way, or if there's any question at all about anything, I invite you to call me directly as your case manager. My cards are here. I'm here to serve you in California.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about the clinical assessment process? Not the part you do, but when we send
Sure.
them, what are the criteria? What specifically are they using to assess that?
Okay. They're actually using a form that they bring a copy of it. It's the self-assessment questions that the participant and the licensee will answer themselves, and then they'll talk about it. Then they'll see my intake note. They'll ask a little more in-depth questions face-to-face, and also read the face and do things that therapists do. And from there, make their clinical assessment. Honestly, some are better than others. I mean, like any other clinician, some are better than others. I'm pretty particular about who I ask for because, I'm picky when it comes to my patients, my participants. I want thorough, and that's just how I roll. But it's a sit down, it's a face-to-face. The assessment tool, they are also given a tool online, and they'll be asking for behavioral history. They'll look for what the participant is telling them about use to see does it jive with what we've been told. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. They may pick up more background as far as family of origin, family genetics. I go back 2 generations when I'm talking about anybody, grandparents, and great-grandparents. With substance use problems or mental illness. Sometimes it comes out in different ways. One may be alcoholism, the next, pain pills, the other compulsive eating. It can come out in a lot of different ways. And so they have their own criteria. They have a clinical tool that they use that they have online from Maximus. They also have to diagnose. They are licensed to diagnose, and they will do that, and they'll talk about on the spectrum where they feel somebody is, and if they're safe to practice, and if they have a substance use disorder, and that's where they go into that question.
Can you give us a sense of how long that process is? Can you just sort of list the sunrise from the online component to the face-to-face component? It's a matter of hours, I think.
They usually meet about an hour with them, and then I get to report within 10 days. So it's not a real long timeline. They'll fill that out as they go into that phase.
And your face-to-face time, how long you think?
Well, for me, I don't do face, I do on the phone. Generally it's an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2. I mean, if someone's rolling, I'm not going to stop them. Yeah, and then from there, I'll write it up, I'll call them on, and we'll discuss the, clinical recommendation. So, obviously not 100% foolproof, but try as best we can to really take a look from many angles and go deep with it. And then if somebody comes from there, I mean, you see people not taking personal responsibility. That's a huge fight. We call that pre-step one in the field of the substance use treatment. People who are not humble and take responsibility for their problems are not healthy people. And as I said, I don't care, with all due respect to legal counsel in the room, I don't care what attorney you have, they're not taking responsibility for what they did. That's a huge fight. It really is. And that should not slide through. Yeah, sometimes when people come to us, because of their fear and they're worried, that they have an attitude called kind of criminal unique. And when we get them into recovery, they learn that is just a facade. Anything else?
I just have a few quick comments. The image that you chose is very telling. Thank you for that reminder. And the other is thank you for recalibrating my thoughts. Words are very powerful. So I know this is substance use, which historically I've always thought of it as a substance of use. So thank you for that. That was very interesting.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the honor of speaking to you, for serving you and physical therapists in California. Really appreciate it, and I left my card there if you want one. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah. 10 minutes? Yeah. Okay, we're back on record and it's 2:07, and we are going to continue with agenda item number 11, and specifically deal with item C.
So it might seem a little familiar. We discussed it at the last meeting. We're trying to figure out how we're going to incorporate Coursework Tool 6 from FSBPT into the existing regulation. And if you can recall some of our discussions in the past, one of the things that we were trying to do was kind of map out through the regulatory language who this really was intended for, who's making the decision of what tool gets used when, right? Since that time, in discussions with staff, one of the things that we figured was currently, the way the regulations are written today, it just says use the corresponding tool to your graduation date. So if you graduated within this set of dates, you may be Coursework Tool 2. And there's been no confusion. It's been very clear. 99% of the time, the right coursework tool is turned in for evaluation, and we see it. However, there have been a couple times where we've had somebody who graduated in 1976, and somehow, some way, through whatever application for whatever jurisdiction, managed to get their evaluation done on Coursework Tool 4. And it would be, I think, unfair and overly burdensome for us to say, at that point, no, you have to go back and get your coursework evaluated at Tool 1 again. So it already happens. There are already anomalies that we have to look at and see how we can account for them. And it's somewhat of an exemption process, but it's one of those systems where logic prevails. And so now we're talking about Coursework Tool 6 being added to a list of corresponding dates. And I think there's some potential of leaving that system the way it is, just adding 6 to say, if you graduated after this date, Coursework Tool 6 will apply to you. The part that kind of changes it for us a little bit is because FSBPT is using the coursework tools as an eligibility requirement after 2020, that essentially, if you want eligibility to the MPTE, you're going to have to be evaluated on Coursework Tool 6 no matter what. That's their proposal today. We're finding that a lot of jurisdictions, along with California, have issue with that, whether it be statutory, regulatory, or just policy-driven. And so FSBPT has delayed the implementation of that until 2020. And I think they might find like they have with a number of other eligibility requirements, they're going to have to be a little bit more flexible from state to state, right? So for us, we might have an influx or an increase. Influx is probably a bad word. An increase in the number of people who, because they applied in another state first, did go through the process and use Coursework Tool 6. Show up in California, apply for application for licensure here, and we see that they graduated in, again, as an example, 1977, so they're Coursework Tool 1, but they've been evaluated and assessed at Coursework Tool 6 level. I would take that. The logic just seems to me that they've fulfilled any deficiency that would have ever been discovered in any of the retro tools. So it would be unfair for us and overly burdensome to make them go back through the process and do it again. So in some ways, I think we might have been overthinking the regulatory language the last time we discussed it, and then just adding it as a date range might suffice. It seems to work so far.
So not having the previous language that we were looking at, it seemed as though whatever we saw last time made it read as though the evaluator was going to get to choose.
Or that the confusion was the evaluator might be the one making the decision.
Okay. And so I could see how it might happen now, but someone also could request, based on the way this is written, someone could request to be done just according to their date.
Right, and I think the practical way that happens is starting somewhere else first, right? So getting an application for licensure in Texas. And Texas is falling in line with FSBT's eligibility requirement and says anybody taking the MPTE to be eligible will have to use Coursework Tool 6. So if you're foreign trained and you're coming to Texas, you're at Coursework Tool 6 no matter what. So not necessarily that the evaluating agency made that determination. They did, but they made it because the applicant has said, I'm applying to Texas, and that's
Okay.
the Texas standard.
But the way this is written, does that give that kind of flexibility that it's acceptable that they have something that doesn't necessarily correspond? So I think last meeting, or last time we discussed this, the concern was that I had, and I think some others had, was that we might accidentally be taking out of the applicant some of the ability to have only the date applied proper coursework tool. Okay, so
Even if they're, so what you're saying is if they intend on starting in California and they want to use Coursework Tool 6, are we limiting the access to that?
no. If I graduated in 1980, I don't want someone to decide to apply Coursework Tool 6 to me.
Right.
I want to have the option to have the proper coursework tool.
So the way that this is currently written now, the retro tool for that date range is what we would require.
I get that.
Yeah.
So that's one issue that seems like now I'm not reading that as being an issue.
Okay.
But now you're saying, but if somebody came from somewhere and they had coursework tool 6 and it was enough for them, even though it maybe was beyond their level, does the way this read give you that kind of flexibility? Or do you now have to have two?
Well, I will tell you that the existing regulation does not give me or the EOs before me that kind of flexibility to make those exemptions that we've made in the past. You know, when we've had situations where somebody should have had Retro Tool 2, but we took Retro Tool 5.
Yeah.
And
And
that might
so,
not necessarily be the authorities granted here. But I think we deferred to what was right for the applicant at the time. And so I don't know if that's something that, I mean, clarity and necessity and that kind of thing, would it create more confusion than it provides clarity? Because that's what I think we got kind of caught in a round-and-round conversation with last time was we need to figure out how to account for those people.
well, and we had the discussion I believe the discussion started in May, and that was when Coursework Tool 5 did not have dates applied to it. And so there was the unknown about should Coursework Tool 5 or 6 be applying be applied in that case. And then when Dr. Dominguez and I were in at the FSBPT training in June, I asked the question, and FSBPT actually, within a matter of weeks, adjusted the title of Coursework 205 to include the date range. So that took out that question, or that removed that concern as a potential question. So I felt in August when we discussed, we were at a good place, but now I'm hearing this question of if somebody's assessed at a higher level than what they should be, but our regs say they should be assessed at the lower level where they at the lower equivalent level where they graduated. We're making them go back and we're evaluating against that lower level instead of accepting their higher level equivalency evaluation.
So that's why I say myself and my predecessors would intervene and create and do a waiver as an exception. We would not require them to go get a secondary evaluation from that agency. There's fees that are associated with it, there's time that's associated with that, and I just see it overly burdensome. And I think that if you're, now it's different if you somehow managed to get a Coursework Tool 1 when you needed a Coursework Tool 5. Obviously, there's an issue of quality there that we would address. But when it's a higher number tool for a lower number graduation date, it seems petty to require them to do something different.
And Coursework Tool 6 doesn't have any phrasing related to graduation. And is that based on how it was released by FSBPT? It just talks about an implementation date.
So Coursework Civil 6 being the current coursework tool would be anything January 1st forward, with Coursework Tools cut off of January or December 31st. Until such new coursework tool is created, and then we'll be back here doing this again.
But Coursework Tool 6, that date doesn't relate to graduation necessarily. It just says implementation.
You might need to consider adding
For graduation.
the same text as you'll see in subdivision B, where it just says,
On or after.
you'd probably have to change it to for individuals who graduated on or after.
The titles of the coursework tools themselves did not make for easy incorporation and consistency. They all have different capitalization and different style of revision date and that kind of thing. Coursework Tool 6 probably being the most unique out of all of them. So we would definitely want to make something that made it clear that it would be from January 1st forward.
And the one right above it goes January 31st of 2016. Are those the right years for both of those?
For which tool?
Number 5 goes to December 31st, 2016, but Coursework Tool 6 begins January 1st, 2016.
That's incorrect.
17.
Yeah, 2017.
Was a year old enough.
Does the board want to consider adding a provision for subdivision A or B? I guess it would probably be subdivision C, that the board may accept higher number coursework tools for earlier graduate dates. That would be creating a permissive exemption. So that would be your situations where the person graduated earlier than, yeah.
That's something definitely the board, should consider. I don't know that it would make my job any easier than how the language is written today, considering that we've done it. There are always going to be exceptions to the rule, and how as I've given examples that it's happened in the past, it has been few and far between. And I don't know that you can write a regulation to account for any given circumstance. So I think that's what kind of spurred that thought of the existing language, the way, at least the way it's currently written, might still work with just the addition of the next coursework tool. The next thing to consider too, in planning maybe, is while FSBPT is planning implementation in 2020, and there are signs that point to there may be some accommodations for different states who have statutory conflicts, what if there isn't? And so there may be issue with that to consider too in the way the language is formed. We might have to address this regulatory package again in the near future. Assuming that it's done by then.
I would support having a subsection C with language crafted to include a higher level coursework tool if the applicant had already had it, or if they choose it. And also changing the language of A6 to kind of mirror that of those above.
Now I can see where it's essentially the title of the document.
Mm-hmm. Because they are incorporated by reference. And we've had conversation in the past about being more vague, if you will, about FSBPT's current coursework tool or corresponding with coursework dates. And it's been advised both by council and OAL that we have to be much more specific than that, including revision dates.
Which I noticed the physical therapist assistant, tool 2, did not include a revision date on that face page, so I don't think we can include it here. It's the last stapled document in your package.
Depends on how you organize your day.
Okay, so the PTA Tool 2, it has the title of implementation date, but that's not how you've titled it in the...
That's correct. So with A subsections 1 through 6, the 1 through 6, there will need to be there can be some editing to make all of those titles 1 through 6 to ensure that they look like the titles of the actual tools, physical therapist assistant, CWT 1 through 6, and there are going to be some of those changes, and the same thing goes for subdivision B, then 1 and 2, those titles will need some changes to make them match the actual titles of the documents, and that includes taking out the revision date because it's not on the actual document and adding that language instead, implementation date February 15, 2017. So what we'll be striving for is to make them match the actual title of the document. First, one thing that'll cause on a couple of them, and Jason has my copy, but it'll make the titles not look uniform with each other, so it won't look attractive in the regulation because FSBPT didn't uniformly title their documents. So for example, on CWT 1 through 6, who graduated is all capitalized. On a couple of them, who graduated is lowercase. So So I think we weren't necessarily going to point out all those little details because we kind of consider them technical, non-substantive changes, which can be delegated to Jason to fix. But just to look out for that in what you're seeing right now, there may need to be some additional edits to make the titles match the tools that are, the names of the tools in front of you.
Okay, that makes sense, but I'm having trouble matching stuff up because number B2 refers to PTA Tool 2.
Yeah, so that'll be the last document in your packet of
I got
tools.
that. I have it right here.
Oh, okay.
But it has a February 15th date on it, but the February 15th date is with number 1.
That's graduated prior to.
See that prior to 15.
And 2 is on or after, and there's a 5 missing.
So in the version of the regulation that you have in front of you, subdivision B, 1 and 2, has a redundancy. So subdivision B, the body of it, not looking at 1 and 2, has the titles of the 2 tools, PTA Tool 2007 and PTA Tool 2. And then it also has the subpoints that name those 2 tools. So our recommendation would be, and again, this would kind of be a technical change, but maybe you want to, because I think it might be confusing when you're looking at it now, you might not understand what's going on. We were going to take out the titles out of the body of B and only have the titles in the sub-bullets 1 and 2.
Yeah, so 1 would actually read, one would read coursework tool for foreign educated physical therapy assistants, PTA Tool 2, implementation date February 15, 2017, end of title, for applicants who graduated on or after February 15th, 2017. And for 1, bouncing back and forth, it would read coursework tool for foreign educated physical therapist assistants, PTA Tool 2007, end of title, for applicants who graduated prior to February 15th, 2017. There'd also be a revision, I think, in the bottom left corner that would have to be captured.
Correct. Could we just draft and utilize a statement that said something to the effect of the executive officer shall have the authority to utilize a coursework tool corresponding to the person's to the therapist or therapist assistant's graduation date?
Or higher.
Or, right, their graduation date or higher, to help deal with this potential conflict of when somebody comes in, they've been assessed at a higher level than what our reg says.
I guess the resistive side of me in that is it's language that's going to open for, you know, a request of exploitation without having said it.
Right.
It's something we already do.
Exactly.
You know, when it happens. But as soon as you put it in writing and people look at it, it might open the door for whatever.
So,
I guess the only issue I have is that of necessity.
and so I guess I'm struggling with exactly what it is we're needing to do then. Because I thought on one side we were looking to formalize all of these particular requirements. I mean, the titles of the documents to me is non-substantive. It's not an issue for us to deal with. I mean,
Right.
it's something that could be just done. If there's the potential for conflict that you've described, and if that's been handled by your position and your decision as a matter of course, why are we looking to now regulate it, formalize it, if it happens so rarely and it can be handled that way?
I don't think we need to.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm an advocate for leaving the language the way it is and just adding the 2 new coursework tools so that we can allow and start processing applications as we receive them.
Okay.
And the rest of it to me would be extraneous.
Okay. So it's just a matter of adding 2 new coursework tools.
That's right.
So moved.
So is that actually a motion? Okay, so I propose that the motion, just to, some recommended language to beef it up a little, is the motion is to approve the proposed regulatory changes as modified. I apologize. The motion is to approve the proposed regulatory changes and direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package, notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified. Would you accept incorporating that language as your motion?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion from Dr. Drummer and a second from Mr. Watkins. Any other board discussion?
We just review, we've talked about a couple of date corrections. Can we just review what we've already, like there was the 2017, it's supposed to be on that one, and you're going to remove the revision of number 2. Is that true? Of B2, that there isn't a revision date.
Correct.
So that'll be removed.
And change B2 to on or after to February 15th?
That's an added clarifier. It's not in the title, but it's a clarifier as to who it applies to.
Right.
Yeah.
For which one? Sorry.
For the PTA.
PTA Tool 1, because Tool 1 does not have dates on it,
Okay.
except for a date of a revision in December of 2012.
Okay.
And that on our motion, or on our regulation form, relates to B1. B1 is Tool 1, or what we're going to call,
Okay.
what we're going to label as PTA Tool 1, because it doesn't have PTA Tool 1 on it. But Tool 2 is B2.
Okay.
But the dates that are at the revision date that's included there should not be included. So that's non-substantive piece that's going to be handled.
And is it February 1st or 15th?
15.
15th, right.
Now I'm clear.
Yeah.
I had a question. Can we relabel an FSBPT tool?
No.
It's not advised because they're incorporated by reference.
Then I misunderstood Dr. Grimm. I thought we proposed we would call it Tool 1. Did I miss that?
There's a parens
Got it.
with the clarifier of who 201 will apply to.
Even though we're not calling it 201.
Got it. That
Right.
was my
Yeah.
confusion.
Thank you.
Any further board discussion? Any public comment?
With that, I'd like to, so the original motion was to simply approve the regulatory changes and then authorize the executive officer to proceed with the rulemaking process. And I think what I heard board member Alviso say is that we wanted to say some modifications here and then so approve it as modified. So I want to recommend an amended motion to make that clear. So the motion would be, the motion is to approve the proposed regulatory changes as modified and direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package, notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified.
I appreciate the attention to detail, but I feel that the changes or that we discussed, the modifications that we discussed, are non-substantive. So I don't know that necessarily needs to go to the idea of modifying the proposed regulatory change, because changing the dates to correspond with what the documents are aligning with, I don't know that we're going down far enough down that road that we need to do something that formal, but
I agree. I think that
either language package in my mind will work.
Yeah, I think that the original motion already gave the executive officer authority to make those non-substantive technical changes, but I thought that it sounded like perhaps board members wanted the motion to reflect that it's being adopted as modified, as well as giving the executive officer authority to make additional non-substantive changes. But either way, if you want to keep the original motion or adopt the amended motion, would work.
And I didn't mean to throw us off course. It was more my own needing to clarify where the conversation was because we were about to vote. So I'm fine with it.
I'd just also like to make one more point that on A6 for the new coursework tool 6, it's not clear that, I think we already discussed this, individuals who graduate on or after January 1, 2017. It doesn't actually say that CWT 6 applies to those graduates. So did you or did you not want to clarify that, because that would be a substantive change to add language that applies, number 6, to individuals who graduated on or after January 1, 2017.
And I appreciate that, Tara. It is one of my concerns. I would feel better if it was in there, only because today I'm sensitive that people continue to have the use of the other coursework tools. Now I realize the tide of everything is moving towards coursework tool 6, and probably in a few years the conversation may change. But right now, if someone were to pick this up and read it, the implementation beginning January 1st almost makes it sound like that's now the one that applies. And so, depending on who would be reading this, they would think they were subject to coursework tool 6.
So-
And so, I think it's just a different intention.
So out of necessity for the PTA tools, because they don't really span their range, we list the title and then we say for what date ranges. I can do that for 1 through 6. Even though they might say that in their title already, we could then state it again outside of the title. And doing that with 6 might help.
Perhaps.
But uniformly doing it for all of them.
Perhaps adding, and I don't know how, for consistency purposes, other regulations look, but when I read the regulatory language here, I was confused about what was the title and what wasn't. And I had to look at the coursework tool to learn that. And so perhaps quotation marks around the title of the tool will distinguish it between the regulation and the name of the tool.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think of referencing documents and how that's done in other literary pieces, and it's often done with italics or with an underline when a body of work somewhere else is being referenced.
Unfortunately, those are two typefaces that we're not allowed to use in regulation.
So if we look at a good example of an incorporation by reference is actually already in our materials on book page 77, tab 11. It's the proposal to revise the disciplinary guidelines, which provides that the board shall consider the, quote, guidelines for issuing citations and imposing discipline, end quote. Yeah.
So as a group, would you be more comfortable with us, I mean, we have another day's worth of business to do, so revising this document to account for things like the quotes, the titles, for applicants who graduated on date ranges through, for coursework tool 1 through 6, and bring that back to you in a printed form so it's a little bit cleaner.
I don't necessarily need that. I think if you put the quotations around the name of the tool, and then I like Dr. Alviso's recommendation to include for graduation, for A6 for graduates on January 1st, 2017 or later. I think that would clear it up.
Okay.
I don't know how everybody else feels.
Dr. Alviso? I wasn't sure that that's what you were agreeing to. It seemed to me that you were understanding coursework tool 6 to be this is what's now being used rather than for graduates of 2017.
My concern is that that's how it's being interpreted.
Yes. That's why I'm suggesting that we could, just like under B1 and 2, clarify that coursework tool 6 is for individuals who graduate on or after January 1, 2017.
Yes.
That would be added as a, after a comma at the very end, after the revision date. It would not be included in the actual title, which, as we know, CWT 6 includes for implementation with that date in its title. That adding for individuals who graduated on or after January 1, 2017 would make it consistent with the new physical therapist assistant tool. Because that does not specify the graduate dates either. But this proposal adds, it clarifies that it's just for those individuals who graduate on or after February 15, 2017.
According to FSBPT, does anyone know if they actually include in the title of the coursework tool 6, do they include for implementation beginning January, or is that just something that's on the front page?
No, it
does.
It's part of the title?
Yes. Let me pull it out.
So if we went to their website, that's what the whole title of that document would say? Yeah, I have it in front of me, but I'm just wondering if that is, just something, a reference for readers, or if that is part of the title of the tool.
And that's been part of the kind of the main struggle with all of the coursework tools, trying to determine what's part of the title and what's not. Most commonly, you'll find on FSBPT's website, CWT6. That's what it's referred to. That's the hyperlink that it connects to, and that kind of thing. So, what its actual title is from the Federation, I don't know that I would use that as kind of the delineator. I would rather refer to something that's just more empirical. You have it in front of you.
It appears clearer if you look at all of the coursework tools. For the old ones, CW1, 2, 3, etc., now that they've incorporated the graduation dates, in the bold above the CWT designation, that appears to be the title.
Right.
Below that CWT designation appears to be instructive, just an instruction rather than a title. So perhaps to simplify our own regulation language, we could strike the for implementation beginning January 1, 2017 from the title only, and then add that it applies to graduates on or after that date.
So for consistency, how would we work that for PTA Tool 2? Would we strike implementation date February 15, 2017 as well?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's part of the title.
Well, they already have in the regulation, the proposal doesn't actually include for implementation. It just says who graduated prior to February 15 or who graduated on or after February 15, 2017.
Except up in the bottom.
Well, did you already say that I think that B needs to be reworked so it's less redundant? So what do you guys think? Do you want to strike the implementation piece out of A6 for implementation beginning January 1, 2016?
Yes.
Yes,
I would say yes as well.
because I feel like now it reads like it was a working document on with FSBPT, and because it's not consistent with the other ones. And if we change the language, it would reflect how it actually should be. And I think if we correct it from our side, we're good.
Arguably, that is also a non-substantive change because we're just removing it from what we believe is the title.
Agreed.
However, back to my substantive correction of actually aiming it to the graduates on or after January 1, 2017. Do you want to add that to your motion, or you could leave yours as is and someone else could bring that motion, that it would be the proposal as modified? So I'm just putting it out there for your discussion.
I'm still of the opinion that it's a non-substantive. I understand it because it's who the tool is for. So to me, that's a non-substantive change because it's exactly describing who the tool is being used for, what it's being used for to me. So I'm good with where my motion is.
I only think it's substantive in the sense that California is using the tool differently than the Federation intends it. The Federation intends that on whatever day, that it became the coursework tool used to evaluate all physical therapist education.
And Mr. Kaiser, perhaps you can clarify, is that the case now or that's the intent of FSBPT? Because I wasn't...
It is only the intent.
It's not the case now that... Okay, that's where I thought we were. So what you're saying is what they're hoping for in the future, but it's not what's being done, what's being asked right now. They're not asking that coursework tool be done for everybody now.
FSBPT's plan to make the coursework tool 6 a requirement for eligibility doesn't start until 2020.
Yes, if a foreign educated physical therapist comes in and looks at this law and looks at number 6 and says, oh, coursework tool 6 for implementation beginning January 1st. Well, I graduated in 1985, but this says implementation as of January 1st.
But we're taking that part out.
Yes.
We're taking out the for implementation, and instead we're going to add the non-substantive, in my mind, parens for graduates after January 1, 2017. On or after January 1, 2017, because that's who coursework tool is intended to apply to. That's why it was developed.
So the way I'm hearing it, for coursework, for option number 6, coursework tool 6, in quotes would be FSBPT coursework tool for foreign educated physical therapists, CWT 6, revision 2016-10, end of quote, for applicants that graduated on or after January 1st, 2017.
Now, just from the legal perspective, you know, I believe that adding 4 individuals who graduated on or after I think it's January 1st, 2017 is a substantive change. You're adding entirely new language specifying which group that subsection applies to that isn't there in the way it currently looks, and that's a substantive change. And so if the board wants to adopt this regulation specifying that subsection 6 applies to that particular group, then the motion would have to be inclusive of the language as modified, or else having a motion that doesn't say that will have subsection 6 not including that group, because Jason cannot go back and then make that substantive change because he won't have authority to do it. And OAL will have a problem with that because they're going to look at your motion and they're going to say, well, you adopted it as is, and later you added this is the particular group it applies to, but that's substantive, we're not accepting it. So I think that to be cautious, that's how the motion should read if that's the board's actual intent.
Happy to entertain the amendment.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
I'm not providing the amendment, I'm going to entertain it.
entertain.
So you'd have to first it.
I would move that as a motion, keep that forward.
I'll second.
Okay, we've got a motion from Dr. Dominguez and a second from Dr. Alviso. Any further discussion?
Oh, excuse me. I believe we still have the first motion on the table. So what do we do with that? So now we have
They'll vote on the second motion first, and if that settles the issue entirely, they don't need to vote on the first motion.
I would counter that and say that Dr. Dominguez's motion was an amendment to add language to the first motion. So we need to vote on the amendment first. If the amendment passes, it includes, I'm going down Robert's rules, I'm sorry. So the amendment passes, it adds the language to the original motion, and then we're going to vote on the main motion. And then we'll be done with it, hopefully.
Well, I guess it's up to Board Member Dominguez. Is your motion to approve the amendment to Board Member Drummer's motion, or were you making your own motion based on what I proposed?
Being from the least legally trained individual here, I'm going to ask counsel what are my options again?
Okay. I'm going to propose motion language, and anyone can adopt that motion language in a new motion if that's acceptable. So we can vote, the goal being a one vote.
I understand. So it's either a new motion or amendment to Dr.
Exactly.
I would say, for sake of brevity, a new motion.
Okay.
So then that raises Ms. Connolly's question and concern that there is already a motion on the floor, a main motion already on the floor, and another main motion cannot be on the floor at the same time. So my main motion would have to be dispensed with, voted down, or postponed indefinitely to be removed from the table. And then Dr. Dominguez's motion could be made and brought forward.
I don't think that's correct, and I see that Saul was consulting the Roberts rules, so maybe we could just give it a second for her to locate the text.
We were really trying to fill in time here, right?
It expands to fill the universe.
Buy a bigger aquarium, get a bigger fish.
Or just more small fish. Next time I'll bring my copy of Roberts so that I'll be able to reference things more quickly.
So what I'm seeing is that Dr. Drummer's correct. There's a main motion, and potentially to counteract the main motion and add this substantive revision, Dr. Dominguez would need to have a substitute motion, which would then be considered before the main motion.
So when substitute motions are presented, both motions are then on the table, and both motions are discussed to their merits. The first motion is discussed first, the second motion as a substitute motion is discussed next. There's a vote on which motion is preferred, and then discussion continues on that motion, and then the vote is on whether or not to adopt that motion. If Dr. Dominguez simply proposed an amendment to the main motion, then we vote that amendment up or down, and it's either incorporated or not incorporated into the main motion that's on the floor, and then we proceed. So there are two options. A substitute motion is an option. But when there's only a single change to the entire thing, the amendment process is the more expedient manner to handle it.
Doesn't seem to be.
That's how it works in practical settings.
Too many years in the House of Delegates.
How about if we call for a vote, vote it down, and start over?
Yeah, I think that, I think we can go with Board Member Drummer's proposal that we can have a vote to amend the original motion, and then we can have a vote on that motion. Try and dispense of it. So does Board Member Dominguez want to continue with his motion, or I'm sorry, you indicated your motion was actually to do, simply adopt the second one, but does anyone want to bring forth a motion to modify the original motion that was seconded to include that language as modified?
Could I do that? I'd like to do that. I was waiting for guidance from council.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any public comment? No?
Excuse me, I need some assistance with Is that a new motion or an amended motion? Or what is that?
So Board Member Drummer made a motion, and it didn't have language in there in the first sentence that said as modified. And Board Member Dominguez just made a motion to amend that original motion to include that language in the first sentence that says as modified.
So then that's going to be voted on.
And that's what's being voted on, the motion to amend.
Got it.
And then if the board adopts that, they can then do a motion then they can move to a vote
Then
on the
vote on the
amendment.
the amended original motion.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
So for clarity's sake, now that we know what your motion is, I believe you seconded it. Do you still agree with this motion to second it?
Dr. Alviso did.
Dr. Alviso.
But since it was an amendment, does it still receive? Does it need a second?
Amendment into the second.
It's a second.
Okay. We have a motion to amend by Dr. Dominguez and a second from Dr. Alviso. Any further comment or discussion? Any public comment? Roll call vote to amend the motion.
Katarina Elby. Katarina Elby is absent. Alicia Urbina amend.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillan is absent. TJ Watkins.
Yes.
All right. So the motion passes 5-0 for those members that are present.
The amendment.
And the motion
To
the
amend.
amendment motion.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
Now the main motion, as amended. Right.
so we already have a first and a second on the amended motion now. And who was the first and second on the original?
I made the motion.
And I seconded
On the original.
on the original.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Make sure our note taker has that, and now we
Yes.
go to public comment.
Okay. Public comment? Okay. No further discussion. Roll call vote on the motion as amended.
Katarina Elby is absent. Alicia Urbina amend.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillan is absent. And TJ Watkins.
Yes.
So the motion as amended passes 5-0 with the members that are present.
I thought you said that was going to be short.
You underestimated
I'm not.
that amended.
I'm very rarely correct. Before we enter into the next regulatory package,
This was the easy one,
I
right?
would request a small recess.
Small recess granted. It is 3:03. Let's be back. Can we be back at 3:10, please?
My Uber should be here by then.
We're back on record, and it is 3:12. We're going to pick up with 11A.
The regulation report. The only progress point to report is the regulatory package or the regulatory language that you looked at the last board meeting to set a pass point for the national examination has left staff and been forwarded to legal counsel for final review for DCA to start the DCA review process. And so in the briefing paper, I think you'll see that it states that it was sent on the 10th of this month. That's incorrect. It just went Monday of this week, I believe.
Ta-da. That's it.
That's what you think. Any questions or comments? Any public comment? Okay. All right, so I think at this point, we are going to move back into closed session for the afternoon.
We have one more large regulatory package to discuss.
Yes. And it sounds like we might want to dive into that lengthy process tomorrow, maybe?
It is the pleasure of the board.
I think going back to finish unfinished business in closed session today is a priority.
I would agree, rather than allowing that unfinished business to stew overnight.
And I want to add that our informational notes does allow for that. So it says that agenda items may be taken out of order and items scheduled for a particular day may be moved or continued to an earlier or later day. So that can happen.
Thank you.
I concur.
I can. Okay. So we'll go into closed session and reconvene tomorrow.
Just to clarify for our videographer that we will be not coming back into open session today.
Thank you, Dr. Drummer. Yes, that's correct.
I think we have to reconvene to adjourn.
No?
Not for the purposes of the webcast, though.
Oh, okay, for the webcast, that's right.
Thank you.